And then there was disinformation. President-elect Trump successfully harnessed the anger and frustration felt by millions of Americans and used it to score a decisive election victory. This is a new analysis by the New York Times, finding how Trump won came down to one essential bet, that his grievances could meld with those of the MAGA movement, and then with the Republican Party, and then with more than half the country. His mugshot became a best-selling shirt. His criminal conviction inspired $100 million in donations in one day. The images of him bleeding after a failed assassination attempt became the symbol of what supporters saw as a campaign of destiny. The paper continues. At times, Mr. Trump could be so crude and self-indulgent on the stump that aides wondered if he were engaged in an absurdist experiment to test how much aberrant behavior voters would tolerate. However, Trump tapped into the anger and frustration millions of voters felt about some of the very institutions and systems he will soon control as the country's 47th president. Voters unhappy with the nation's direction turned him into a vessel for their rage. Reverend Al, what do you make of that assessment?
I think it's right on. I think that they hit the real reason that we are where we are. And that is that everyday people of all races that were suffering from economic insecurity, inflation, and others felt they were not being addressed. And many of us kept warning that you can't have the Beltway intellectuals guide this. There were people in the campaign trying to fight back. Mignon Moore, Leah Daughtry was telling them, wait a minute, you got to listen to people. Trump was in a very crafty way saying, yes, butter's too high. Yes, you're suffering. And they did it. Well, the other side was not saying why this was the case. Therefore, it was interpreted that you don't understand what I'm going through. And telling me about all this stuff that he's done doesn't answer the reason I'm in the condition I'm in.
I saw them try, but I guess not enough.
Yeah, I mean, there are certainly similarities to what we saw in 2016 and now, where there was just this anger that the elites were doing well, the rest of us were suffering. That's what the bet was, and it was aftermath of the Great Recession, and now the aftermath of the pandemic, resulting inflation. We're seeing leaders of democracies across the globe either lose jobs or at least be severely weakened in its aftermath. So, Sandy, your publication has a new piece which has the title, Welcome to Trump's World. The Economist writes in part this. In 2016, some people comforted themselves with the thought that Mr. Trump's presidency was an aberration by choosing to overlook his attempts to stop the transfer of power to Mr. Biden in 2020. Voters have shown how wrong that conclusion was. Instead, they have endorsed Mr. Trump's unbounded exploitation of partisanship as the basis of his politics, including the slander of his opponents as corrupt and treacherous. This has spread a cynicism and despair about the merits of government that may serve him but will not serve America's democracy. MAGA is a movement of iconoclasm against the kind of benign internationalists who occupied the White House for 70 years. This week, a majority of voters embraced it with their eyes open. And digging a little deeper on this, it's not just that we've all seen Trump's conduct in office with the impeachments and the insurrection, but also what he has pledged to do, mass deportations, a crackdown on his enemies, and a majority of Americans looked around and said, yes, we'll take it.
This is what we want.
They did, but I think I would frame it slightly different to the New York Times, which is, I think there was definitely, amongst his core supporters, there's a sort of fanatical Trumpism in the belief in everything he does. I think many ordinary people, many Americans of all walks of life, when it wasn't necessarily rage, it was just they thought, actually, he says a whole bunch of things that I don't believe. The first term was pretty good, and on important things that matter to me, he actually is talking, they think, sense. On immigration, it is true that this government has failed to deal with the border until very recently. It's a real problem. He got it. he got the sense of that many people feel that the kind of culture wars and the left, the progressive slant of the Democratic Party is out of sync with Americans on gender, on trans issues, on all of that kind of stuff. And those were the ads that really went. And I think he taps into a sense which is it's not so much just a feeling of rage. It's a sense that Americans across the board think that he is closer to them than Democrats are. But the reason we wrote this bigger picture editorial is that what is definitely clear is that his sense of America's role and what America should be doing in the world is very different than the last 70 years. This is a protectionist view. This is a view of much more akin to the 1930s. That's why I think this is a shift. Really, we have to go back 70 years to see a shift like this. And I would posit that the consequences for those of us who live outside America are going to be, as alarming or more alarming. And I think that you can go around the world and see, and it's not surprising that foreign leaders were picking up the phone and tweeting out congratulations in sort of as fast as they could, because no one kind of knows what he's going to do. Everyone wants to get it on his right side. Everyone knows he's transactional. He wants American strength. They don't quite know what that means. And so they're trying to position themselves to get in his good books. And actually, I think, and this may surprise you, he may not be as bad, for example, for Ukraine as many people think. And I was very struck in our reporting this week. My colleague based in Kiev wrote an excellent piece that suggests senior people in Kiev were rather hoping for a Trump victory because they were so fed up of the sort of self-denial and timidity of the Biden administration that they felt, they weren't getting the weaponry that they needed. There was a sense that there was so much worry in Washington right now about escalation by Putin. So I think it's like the whole post-war order has been thrown up, shaken up. And we spoke last week, and I said, when we wrote our endorsement leader, I said, it may be that we'll get through this and it'll be like Trump won. And my goodness, I hope that's right. The risks were too high for me, which is why we were worried about it. I just hope these tail risks don't come to pass and that we actually get... There are some good things that could come of this. I know it's hard to, it's hard for you to think about that right now, but there are areas that could be deregulation. I think there is a huge amount that he could do, good things that he could do. There are good things that could be done in foreign policy. We just have to hope they get done and the risks aren't. And I think rather than... I'm trying to look forward and I'm trying to look positive about it. And I think that at the moment it's just up in the air and it depends what Trump we get.
To see where it lands. And as we're looking back, Willie, to Zenny's point, Joe had been mentioning those ads, those misleading trans ads that they spent, I think, $30 million on. And were airing just everywhere, especially in front of football audiences, and made a difference.
Yeah, no question about it. We've talked about that. Those broke through, and that showed up in the exit polling. So as